Mr. Banal, I want to explore a little bit further in terms of what access you did not have to the information you requested to verify this. Again, I value the paper backups, I value the controls, but they're only as good as they're actually used, and they only provide confidence to the extent that it's a transparent process. So just speak a little bit to what you had access to, what you did not have access to, what you're denied, and then go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The very sad fact is that we were denied access to almost anything meaningful that would allow us to verify.
Can you be specific?
Absolutely, Senator. Let's talk about the paper backups on the electronic machines. We were denied any access to those except from one machine in the entire state of Nevada. We were denied that access. I wish I could have quoted Mr. Krebs when we were fighting our discovery fights at in Nevada, saying how important it was to get access to these. We couldn't see any paper backups, and on top of that, the printers on the machine were malfunctioning at such a high rate. We doubt that the paper backups were actually giving us anything of use anyhow. So these paper backups that are supposed to provide such transparency, we couldn't use them. We couldn't see them. We couldn't use they provided us zero transparency at all, except in one machine in the entire state of Nevada. Another example is the fact that we were denied any meaningful discovery in the case in order to go and examine the full extent of the voter fraud. For instance, even when we were able to subpoena the records that led us to discover those 4,000 non-citizens who voted, we couldn't put that into evidence because we didn't get them until the end of the discovery period, and then the court said, well, at that point it's too late. Our discovery period was essentially 3 days. And we were denied any meaningful opportunity to even use in our case the information that we got. And the court didn't even consider those things, unfortunately. We were denied, we tried to be able to understand the code of these machines, to be able to find out, for instance, as the chairman pointed out, whether machines were hooked up to the internet, whether any of that happened, be able to do a forensic review. We brought forensic experts all the way to Nevada, people that could have discovered this information, people that could have told us what happened with these machines, and we weren't allowed near them. We weren't allowed any forensic audit of it. Nothing that could have given us any transparency, because transparency is not political. That's what we've talked about here. That's what we were denied in Nevada, is any attempt to actually find out what happened. Here's the troubling thing, is one of the reasons that they said that we couldn't get transparency on this machine is because they're proprietary. The information, the coding was proprietary. But we're talking about the countings of votes for the office of President of the United States, and they're not going to let us see the code for how they actually coded the votes? You got to pick one. It's either open source, and we exactly know the way that these machines are counting the votes, or you have to go back to a verifiable system to make sure that the results that are being reported are the results that we get from actual voters, because that is where democracy breaks down. That is really the fear that we have of losing democracy, is when it's not the people's votes that are being counted, but fraud that's being counted. And we can't just pretend that the emperor has any clothes if he doesn't. We can't pretend that we have a clean election when there's evidence to the contrary. And the way that we get that is through transparency. And we were denied that in Nevada at every single turn. We had a clerk who, a registrar of voters, who literally dodged our subpoenas. We had the holiday weekend over Thanksgiving in order to serve subpoenas. They locked the doors of the offices. He locked himself in his house. He refused to accept a subpoena. That same registrar of voters, we have a whistleblower that says he was wearing a Biden-Harris pen to inspect voter sites. This isn't something where we're trying to attack officials. We're trying to say that we have to make sure that it's nonpartisan, that we have to make sure that there's transparency. And you can't deny transparency at every turn, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Krebs, real quick, mindful that, again, all this testimony is under oath. So what you heard from Mr. Banal is testimony under oath. Does that trouble you? And in your assessment, this was the most secure election. Again, I'm all for paper backups. I'm all for, those controls. I think, if used, it works. We have a system of advocacy in terms of a legal system. You advocate for one side. It's a combative system, but both sides have to have information. Does that trouble you in terms of lack of transparency that Mr. Banal is testifying to under oath?
I think a couple things here. One is that in Commissioner Palmer's opening statement, he talked about the certification process, the voluntary voting systems guides, the certifications that happen at the state level, the logic and accuracy testing of these machines, the parallel testing that happens the day of or during the election process, the sampling and forensic audits. We saw Georgia do that with a number of their machines to ensure that the hashes match what they expected. I do think that yes, we need to make sure that working with these vendors that we have the appropriate insight and transparency into the process. Certainly, I would, I think we need to have a conversation on what the appropriate auditing process looks like. I have seen some auditing that is not necessarily up to snuff, so we need to explore that a little bit more fully. But again, if you've got, we're talking about paper backups, but we're also talking about paper ballots.
But again, only if they have. He just said they didn't have access to the ballots. Again.
I'm not.
So,
I'd be
I mean,
working
again,
with
all I'm asking, does that trouble you that there wasn't that kind of a transparency, or are you challenging his testimony?
Oh, of course not.
Okay,
don't have
so again,
there.
this system is, we only have confidence in it if it's completely transparent and somebody who's challenging results has access to the information. The paper ballot backup can have their forensic experts take a look at the computer systems, and that wasn't afforded. I'm just asking, does that concern you?
I think that there are multiple controls in place throughout the system. If there is a legal mechanism at the back end that allows for independent third-party auditing.
But that's the problem. The legal system didn't allow for the transparency. Okay, you can talk about all these controls up front, but then in the end, where there are affidavits signed and people are making charges, when you can't obtain the evidence to actually try it in court, and your evidence is denied in court, do you understand how that frustrates people? And that's the problem. That's why there's suspicions, because this was not, in so many cases that we've heard about, a transparent process. But with that, I'll turn to Senator Scott.